Hello and welcome to today's lesson. I'm your hard-working but indefatigable teacher, Mr. Burton. You will need to watch this video and take notes as you go. You may need to watch certain parts of the video a few times to ensure complete understanding. This is your homework and I will check your notes tomorrow before we get started. I hope you learned something.
Now, so there's a surplus. What happens to the surplus? Well, the government implemented the price floor, and the government must purchase the excess production in order for the price floor to achieve the objective of providing income support for firms in the economy. It's no good the government just saying at this high price you can make a profit, because the firms cannot sell all of their product at this high price. So, as the government legislates and regulates the price floor, and the price floor inevitably results in a surplus, the government needs to find a way of dealing with that excess amount of the good that's produced by the firms it wants to support. So government purchases of the good enable producers to receive the minimum price. And that's essentially an increase in demand for the good. We have initial demand, and it's just consumers in the market. But to be able to purchase all of the product that's being supplied now at that higher price, the government must step in to purchase it, and that's an increase in demand. So it's D1 plus government purchases. So there is still the initial market demand for the good, and now the government purchases of the good shifts the demand curve right until a new demand curve, D2 equals D1 plus the government purchases, and that's going to intersect with the supply curve at the minimum price. The price floor is then supported. So let's model the effects of a price floor. We can do this in terms of consumer and producer surpluses. So a new higher price is set in the market. Firms cannot charge below this. So this is the price consumers pay and the price that producers receive. Quantity supplied increases as the price increases, and quantity demanded decreases as the price increases. This is our surplus. This is our increase in demand, intersecting with the price floor and the supply curve. Demand increasing because the government purchases. We can have a look at the consumer surplus before the price floor, calculate the value of that triangle easily. Same with the producer surplus. Right, the new higher price means that the consumer surplus is reduced. So new higher price, consumers are paying more for the product and they are consuming less of it as well. A healthy looking producer surplus there. Producer surplus much increased after the price floor. So that's area above the supply curve and below the price in the market. And this is the cost to the government to support the price floor by making those additional purchases to clear the surplus. And that area is the entire welfare loss to society. Let's have a look at stakeholders and what the price floor is doing to them. Right, so consumers are definitely worse off. They're paying more for the product and consuming less of it. There is a loss in consumer surplus, and that's shown to the left there. Producers are very happy. They're better off because the output of the good has increased, so they're supplying more and they're receiving a higher price for each unit of output being produced and sold. That increase in price and the increase in sales lead to an increase in producers' total revenues, and they have improved profitability. The price the firm receives increases from P1 to PF, and there is an increase in quantity supplied at the higher price. Q1 to QS, the gain in consumer and producer surplus, PS1 to PSF is shown there. The government is worse off. It's going to have to pay for producers to obtain that surplus output. And all things being equal, that is a strain on the government budget. That's money the government has to come up with that they can't spend on other things, or they may even have to borrow to finance the price floor. Increased taxes could be a result as well. Employers, as firms increase their output as a result of the price floor, it's likely that firms are going to need extra workers to produce that product. So wages may be higher as these protected firms face less competitive pressure to be cost efficient, and there may be a shortage of skilled labour in the industry. Therefore, employers who are hired and will have higher wages will certainly be better off. Society as a whole, now we're looking at an over-allocation of resources to producing the good or service, and because of that, society is worse off. Also, because firms covered by the price floor have this protection, those firms which are relatively inefficient will still continue to produce goods and services covered by the price floor. And foreign producers, now because the government needs to find a way of dealing with the excess amount of the good that is produced by the firms it wants to support, there are a couple of options, and both of these affect foreign producers. Exporter, government can use an export subsidy to sell the excess supply of goods into international markets. Now, without that subsidy, the good will not be price competitive in international markets as the price floor has increased the price of the good. Or it can be used for aid for developing countries. The excess good is, if the excess good is non-perishable and you can transport it, governments can send a surplus to developing countries as aid, especially food aid. Right, consequences of price floor for the economy. We know that there is a surplus. The market cannot clear. There is a surplus of the good being produced. The government must make efforts to dispose of that surplus. So the storage, exporting, or sending it as aid to developing countries. Price floors enable inefficient firms to continue production. Firms protected by a price floor don't have the same incentives to reduce costs and produce efficiently because they don't have to compete with lower cost competitors. Now, there's an over-allocation of resources and allocative inefficiency in the market. So the price floor results in increased quantities of the good or service being supplied than that which would otherwise be achieved at the competitive free market equilibrium. So too many resources, those scarce factors of production, are being allocated to the production of this good or service, and too little of the good or service is now being consumed. Society has been made worse off as a result of allocative inefficiency and the over-allocation of resources to the production of this good. And we have those negative welfare impacts modelled there by the deadweight loss, that loss of welfare to society. And let's have an example of a price floor here, the minimum wage.
In the next two videos, we'll turn our attention to price floors and their effects. In this video, we'll look at the first two effects and cover one of the most well-known price floors, the minimum wage. Let's get started. A price floor is a minimum price allowed by law. That is, it is a price below which it is illegal to buy or sell. It's called a price floor because you cannot go below the floor. We're going to show that price floors create four significant effects: surpluses, lost gains from trade, wasteful increases in quality, and a misallocation of resources. We're going to go through these each in turn. Before we do so, however, it's worthwhile asking this question. Price floors are less common than price ceilings. Why is this? That is, it's more common to see a price being held below the market price than it is to see a price being held above the market price. Why? One reason may be political. That is, there are typically more buyers of goods than there are sellers of goods. So when you hold a price below the market price, you may benefit, or at least appear to benefit, more buyers, more people, more voters than when you hold a price above the market price, which would appear to harm buyers. Now, interestingly, the paradigmatic, the classic case of a price floor is the exception which proves the rule, because the classic case of a price floor is a good for which there are more sellers than there are buyers. So here's a case where the price is kept above the market price, and it makes sense politically because there are lots of sellers compared to buyers. So what is this good for which price floor is common and for which sellers exceed buyers? We'll get to that in just a moment. Think about it. So one of the things which a price floor does is it creates surpluses. Okay, now have you thought of the good which a price floor is common, and it's a good for which the number of suppliers exceeds the number of buyers? Well, the minimum wage is a price floor. The minimum wage is a price below which you cannot sell labor. And the suppliers of labor exceed the buyers of labor. So it's not surprisingly that a minimum wage is often politically successful. Now, who will the minimum wage affect? Workers with very high productivity who are already earning more than the minimum wage, they're not going to be affected by the minimum wage, perhaps at all. Instead, it will affect the least experienced, least educated, least trained workers. Low-skilled teenagers, for example, are most likely to be affected by the minimum wage. Now, I said that a price floor creates surpluses. A minimum wage is a price floor, so it's going to create a surplus. A surplus of labor we call what? We say a gaggle of geese, a pride of lions. A surplus of labor is called unemployment. So let's look with our model to understand how a minimum wage can create unemployment, particularly among the least skilled workers. Okay, here's our standard diagram, except we're going to put the quantity of labor, especially unskilled labor, on the horizontal axis, the wage or the price of labor on the vertical axis. There's our supply curve. There's our demand curve with the market wage and the market employment level. Now we're going to add the minimum wage. This is a price floor below which it is illegal to buy or sell this good, labor. Now we just read the consequences of the price floor off the diagram. So we read, for example, that at the minimum wage, the quantity of labor demanded is read off the demand curve. Remember, this is the demand for labor. So this is the quantity of labor demanded. And at the minimum wage, the quantity of labor supplied is read off the supply curve. Let's put that point on. That's QS. So we have QS units of labor supplied, QD units of labor demanded. QS is bigger than QD, so the difference between them is a surplus of labor, also known as unemployment. Now, the minimum wage is a controversial and hotly debated issue. Some academic results indicate that the unemployment effect of a modest increase in the minimum wage would not be substantial. At the same time, however, we also have to recognize that a modest increase in the minimum wage would not have big benefits either. First, only a small percentage of workers are going to be affected by the minimum wage. 97% or so of workers already earn more than the minimum wage. In fact, even among young workers, 94% or so, less than 25 years of age, they already earn more than the minimum wage. At best, the minimum wage will raise the wages of some low-skill and young workers, most of whose wages would have increased anyway as they became more skilled. At worst, the minimum wage will increase the price of a hamburger, create some unemployment, and or keep some teenagers in school for a bit longer. Not all necessarily bad things. What, however, about a larger increase in the minimum wage? Few economists doubt that a large increase in the minimum wage would cause serious unemployment. After all, we could not create prosperity by raising the minimum wage higher and higher. If a minimum wage of $10 an hour is a good idea, what about $15? What about $20, $25, $100, $500 an hour? Would we all be rich at that point? Would we all be receiving wages of $500 an hour? Of course not. Most of us would be unemployed. So a large increase in the minimum wage is going to cause serious unemployment. And a good example of this is Puerto Rico in 1938. Congress actually set the first minimum wage at this time at 25 cents an hour. That may seem low, but that's at a time when the average wage in the United States was still less than $1 an hour, with 62.5 cents an hour. Congress, however, forgot to exempt Puerto Rico, when the average wages in Puerto Rico at that time were much lower than in the rest of the United States, only 3 cents to 4 cents an hour. So this modest increase in the minimum wage for the continental United States was a huge increase in the minimum wage for Puerto Rico. And lots of Puerto Rican firms went bankrupt. It created devastating unemployment. In fact, Puerto Rican politicians came to Washington to beg for an exemption to get them out of the minimum wage. So a large increase in the minimum wage would certainly cause substantial and serious unemployment. We do see higher minimum wages in other countries. The minimum wage in France is higher than the U.S. relative to average wages in those two countries. In addition, labor laws in France make it very difficult to fire workers once they have been hired. As a result, firms in France are very reluctant to hire new workers. Younger workers are especially affected because they're less productive, and also they're less known commodities, so the risk of hiring them is greater. As a result, unemployment among young workers is very high in France. It was 23% in 2005, and that was long before the economic crisis, the financial crisis affecting the entire world. So even during good times, unemployment in France among young workers is very high because the minimum wage is high and because firms don't want to hire given how difficult it is to fire workers. Okay, let's also show that the minimum wage creates lost gains from trade. This ought to be very familiar by now. At the minimum wage, the quantity of labor demanded is given by QD. That is less than the quantity of labor which would be traded given the market wage, this market employment. Key point is that there are buyers of labor who are willing to buy labor at a price below the minimum wage, and there are suppliers of labor, workers, who are willing to work below the minimum wage. These deals would be mutually profitable, but they are illegal. So there are buyers of labor who are willing to buy below the minimum wage. There are sellers willing to sell. These deals would be mutually profitable, but they're illegal. They're not made. Because of that, there are lost gains from trade or a deadweight loss. Okay, so we have covered the first two effects of price floors, namely surpluses and lost gains from trade. In the next lecture, we will use a slightly different example to look at wasteful increases in quality and a misallocation of resources.
If you want to test yourself, click Practice Questions.
And now just calculating the price floors effects. So we take our initial market equilibrium, price, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. In goes our price floor at $4. Quantity supplied increases to 120 million kgs. Quantity demanded decreases to 40 million kgs. This is our surplus, quantity demanded being less than quantity supplied. And here it is 120, which is the quantity supplied, minus 40, quantity demanded. And we now have a surplus of 80 million kgs in the market. Calculating consumer surplus, finding the value of that triangle there. Calculating the value of the producer surplus, value of the green triangle. In comes our increased demand from government purchases. The higher price means that the consumer surplus drops to 20 million kgs. Producer surplus, nice easy triangle to calculate as well. It's jumped up to 180 million kgs. Government expenditure on the price floor. And the most difficult